January 1944. The sun burns low over a Pacific atoll, waves lapping at coral-strewn beaches. Sweat drips beneath the weight of olive-drab packs, rifles scraping against sand and stone. American Marines move with deliberate strength, shoulders broad, legs long, each step carrying the bulk of heavy equipment. Across the shoreline, Japanese defenders crouch in foxholes, lean frames hunched under canvas helmets, eyes scanning for the first sign of movement. The contrast is immediate, physical, undeniable. Marines tower over the defenders by inches that matter when lifting mortars, hauling ammunition, or climbing ridges under fire. Every pound of body mass translates to endurance, every inch to reach and leverage. The heat is oppressive, a thick humidity that clings to skin and uniform alike. Yet the Marines press forward, with calculated force, their strides measured, powerful. The defenders' smaller bodies, lighter limbs, must compensate with speed, agility, and cunning. In this crucible of sand, sweat, and steel, the war is distilled to the human form. Size, strength, stamina, and the battlefield will soon reveal how those measurements shape life and death. This physical disparity will define engagements yet to come. By 1941, the Pacific Theater had already become a sprawling contest of strategy, endurance, and industrial might. The Japanese Empire, having seized territories across Southeast Asia, relied heavily on speed, surprise, and disciplined infantry trained for aggressive offensives. Their soldiers were typically shorter and lighter, averaging 5 feet 4 inches in height and around 140 pounds, molded by years of rigorous, resource-limited training and diets that emphasized rice, fish, and minimal protein. Japanese doctrine prized agility, stealth, and relentless tenacity, preparing troops to fight in dense jungles, across coral atolls, and through fortified positions with precision and minimal exposure. American Marines, in contrast, were products of a society with abundant resources, standardized nutrition, and systematic physical conditioning. Recruits averaged 5 feet 7 inches to 5 feet 8 inches in height and 220 pounds, giving them a distinct physical advantage. Conditioning focused on endurance under load, strength for heavy artillery and vehicles, and adaptability to extreme environments. Their training emphasized both aggression and coordination, with an understanding that firepower could amplify manpower but required the human body to sustain extended engagements. The contrast extended beyond individual soldiers. Japanese forces often relied on lighter equipment, portable mortars, and short-range rifles optimized for mobility, while American units carried heavier rifles, machine guns, and supplies to sustain prolonged offensives. This discrepancy in body mass and physical capability directly influenced how each side deployed its weapons, moved under fire, and endured harsh conditions. Early skirmishes on islands like Guadalcanal and Tarawa illustrated the stakes. Marines advancing under the tropical sun could carry ammunition, water, and medical supplies in loads that would exhaust lighter troops quickly. In defensive positions, Japanese soldiers leveraged knowledge of terrain to mitigate physical disadvantages, digging trenches and constructing bunkers that narrowed engagement distances and emphasized marksmanship over brute strength. Yet even in these fortified positions, the Marines' combined mass and firepower often broke initial lines, forcing rapid, costly adaptations by Japanese commanders. Nutrition, though often overlooked, shaped outcomes. Marines consumed higher-calorie rations, rich in protein and fats, sustaining energy for long days of combat and heavy labor. Japanese soldiers, constrained by supply lines and limited resources, endured deficiencies that impaired recovery, reduced muscular endurance, and heightened susceptibility to disease. Heat, humidity, and tropical disease were universal threats, but larger bodies with greater caloric reserves provided Marines with a buffer against exhaustion, while smaller Japanese frames risked collapse during sustained labor or firefights. Even at the strategic level, planners recognized these disparities. U.S. military intelligence noted the physical differences and their implications for assault planning, equipment allocation, and casualty expectations. Commanders calculated that heavier, taller troops could scale ridges, carry mortars, and sustain prolonged engagements more reliably than their opponents, influencing the choice of landing sites, timing of assaults, and coordination of combined arms operations. Japanese officers, aware of these limits, compensated by emphasizing ambush tactics, night attacks, and infiltration, methods designed to offset brute force disadvantages with speed, surprise, and psychological pressure. This intersection of physiology and strategy was not merely statistical. It shaped the rhythm of battle, the moments of decision, and the endurance of men under fire. A Marine's stride across open beach, bearing a 50-pound pack, a rifle and ammunition, contrasted sharply with the smaller, lighter defender navigating a narrow trench network. Each inch of height, each additional pound, translated into leverage in combat, stamina under fire, and the ability to bear burdens that could decide the outcome of an engagement. The physical dimension of war became particularly pronounced in early amphibious assaults. At Guadalcanal, Marines landed under artillery and small arms fire, wading through surf with packs dragging each pound of additional mass demanding effort, but conferring resilience. Japanese defenders, lighter but equally determined, relied on camouflage, rapid movement, and coordinated fire to resist. In these encounters, the raw physics of human bodies intersected with discipline, training, and terrain. The difference in stature and weight did not guarantee victory, but it established a baseline upon which strategy, morale, and technology operated. The Japanese military's reliance on mobility and precision underscored their recognition of physical limitations. Light infantry excelled in jungle combat, climbing steep slopes and executing night raids where bulk could hinder movement. They honed techniques for silent movement, rapid concealment, and coordinated ambushes. Against Marines, however, these advantages were tempered by the consistent pressure of mass and firepower. Larger, heavier bodies allowed Marines to absorb shocks of artillery, carry heavier weapons, and sustain repeated advances under fire, often overwhelming defenders before stealth or cunning could be fully applied. The implications of these differences became starkly visible during the Battle of Tarawa in November 1943. Marines stormed the reef under withering Japanese fire. While defenders had prepared fortified positions, the physical advantage of the Americans meant they could carry heavier weapons and explosives over jagged coral, reach bunkers, and neutralize resistance with brute force that smaller troops could not counter effectively. Even with entrenched positions, Japanese soldiers struggled to reposition quickly under sustained bombardment. Physical mass, combined with disciplined training and coordinated fire, tipped the scales in favor of the Marines in direct engagements. Nutrition and logistics magnified these disparities. U.S. supply lines ensured Marines received consistent rations with high caloric content, enabling longer operational endurance and rapid recovery after injury. Protein and fat intake strengthened muscles, reduced fatigue, and increased resistance to disease and heat exhaustion. Japanese soldiers often relied on minimal rations of rice, dried fish, and preserved vegetables, leaving them undernourished and prone to fatigue. In jungle and island environments, the cumulative effects of weight, strength, and energy reserves could decide not just individual survival, but the outcome of a coordinated assault. Even in non-combat scenarios, the physical differences shaped operational planning. Landing craft, equipment transport, and field engineering all assumed marine strength as a baseline. Heavier men could move artillery pieces, construct fortifications, and carry ammunition across difficult terrain. Japanese defenders, lighter and more agile, focused on rapid repositioning and camouflage rather than sustained heavy labor. Commanders on both sides calculated the limits of their troops, with American planners exploiting their soldiers' size to maintain pressure during extended offensives, while Japanese officers relied on hit-and-run tactics, delaying actions, and attrition strategies to offset the imbalance. These contrasts also influenced casualty management. Marines able to carry wounded comrades longer distances could evacuate casualties efficiently, preserving unit cohesion and morale. Japanese soldiers, lighter but fewer in number, and with limited carrying capacity, often faced the grim necessity of leaving wounded behind. Such outcomes affected the psychological tenor of engagements. The ability to sustain numbers, maintain morale, and continue advancing under fire became intrinsically linked to the physicality of the force. Beyond individual battles, the size and strength disparity affected unit cohesion and tactical execution. Marines formed assault teams capable of coordinated, synchronized movements under extreme duress, each man contributing mass and momentum to overcome obstacles. Japanese squads, though disciplined and highly trained, were constrained by lower body mass in tasks requiring brute force, such as breaching fortifications or countering machine gun nests. Their solutions, tunnels, hidden positions, and explosive devices, attempted to equalize the imbalance, but rarely neutralized it entirely. By early 1944, the operational reality was clear. American commanders recognized that physical superiority allowed for sustained pressure, higher mobility under load, and enhanced combat resilience. Japanese forces, facing attrition and supply shortages, relied on ingenuity and determination to compensate for size and strength deficits. The battlefield had become a contest not only of strategy and weaponry, but of human form. How bodies could endure, carry, and apply force under the relentless stress of combat. The stage was set for decisive clashes where these physical disparities would manifest in blood, fire, and strategy, shaping the outcomes of engagements that would define the Pacific War. The human dimension of warfare in the Pacific was immediately influenced by sheer physicality. A Marine's larger frame conferred endurance advantages in tasks that defined survival and combat efficiency. Carrying packs exceeding 50 pounds, advancing under artillery barrages, or scaling ridges to assault fortified positions demanded more than training, it demanded mass. American Marines averaged 5 inches taller and 80 pounds heavier than their Japanese counterparts, a difference that translated into longer strides, greater lifting capacity, and a higher tolerance for sustained exertion. Japanese soldiers, smaller and lighter, relied on speed, agility, and precision. Their survival depended on conserving energy, employing camouflage, and exploiting terrain. Fatigue accrued faster, and the cumulative effect of repeated marches, exposure to tropical heat, and engagement under fire magnified the physical disparity. In close-quarters combat, Japanese troops leveraged dexterity and compactness, fitting into trenches, bunkers, and jungle thickets where Marines' bulk slowed maneuverability. Yet, in open engagements or assaults against entrenched positions, physical advantage became decisive, enabling Marines to push forward under conditions that could exhaust lighter soldiers rapidly. Leadership perspective command decisions were profoundly affected by these physical realities. Marine officers factored body mass and strength into planning amphibious landings, supply allocation, and assault sequences. A team's ability to carry heavy weaponry, evacuate casualties, or fortify positions influenced operational tempo. Higher casualty tolerance and physical resilience allowed Marines to sustain pressure longer, giving commanders latitude to execute aggressive strategies that might have been untenable for lighter forces. Japanese leaders adapted differently. Aware of their troops' smaller stature, they emphasized ambushes, infiltration, and night attacks. Leaders cultivated ingenuity, psychological warfare, and terrain mastery to offset limitations in brute strength. Operational plans accounted for restricted load-bearing capacity and fatigue thresholds, dictating shorter, targeted offensives designed to maximize impact, while minimizing sustained physical exertion. Leadership in both forces was inseparable from human physiology. Strategic choices were calibrated around the limits of the men themselves. On the battlefield, physical differences shaped tactics. Marines exploited mass to sustain suppressive fire, advance under cover, and breach obstacles. Heavier soldiers could transport mortars, artillery shells, and ammunition across unforgiving terrain, maintaining offensive momentum. Larger frames absorbed impacts from shrapnel, debris, and environmental hazards more effectively, reducing operational interruptions caused by injury or fatigue. Japanese tactics favored concentration and precision. Smaller, lighter soldiers executed flanking maneuvers, scaled obstacles quickly, and utilized confined spaces to establish effective fields of fire. Their compact frames enabled rapid repositioning. Essential in defensive operations where the ability to vanish into foliage or bunkers prevented attrition from escalating unchecked. Yet, when confronted with sustained marine pressure, the physical disadvantage limited the duration and intensity of engagement, forcing withdrawals or risk of annihilation. Physical differences influenced how soldiers wielded weapons and managed equipment. Marines could carry heavier rifles, ammunition, and support weapons, enabling sustained firepower across beaches, reefs, and jungle slopes. Their size allowed for stability when operating machine guns, mortars, and explosive devices, maintaining accuracy and rate of fire during prolonged engagements. Japanese soldiers favored lighter weapons compatible with their frames, relying on rifles, submachine guns, and grenades optimized for mobility. Effective use required careful positioning, stealth, and teamwork. The smaller body mass limited endurance when transporting heavy ordnance over long distances, constraining the intensity of counterattacks or defensive operations. Equipment design, in essence, reflected physiological reality. Battle effectiveness was inseparable from the human form wielding it. For Japanese soldiers, confronting larger, heavier Marines was a persistent challenge. Observations during early engagements noted the imposing physical presence of the Americans. Height and mass translated into longer reach, greater force in hand-to-hand combat, and the ability to sustain heavy packs under fire. Enemy troops often had to adjust tactics in real time, using terrain, concealment, and ambushes to offset brute force disadvantages. Even disciplined soldiers recognized that a frontal clash favored the Marines, and strategies emphasized disruption, surprise, and minimizing exposure to direct assaults. Physical disparity influenced morale on both sides. Marines, aware of their strength advantage, carried an implicit confidence into combat. The ability to endure longer, carry heavier equipment, and sustain offensive pressure reinforced cohesion and combat effectiveness. For Japanese defenders, smaller frames under relentless bombardment could erode confidence. Encounters where numerical and physical pressure converged heightened stress, fatigue, and the psychological weight of facing a physically superior opponent. Morale was as dependent on the body as on training or discipline. Strength became a tangible form of psychological leverage. The difference in body mass and structure also dictated injury outcomes and recovery potential. Larger Marines absorbed impacts from debris, shrapnel, and falls with comparatively less incapacitation. Heavier musculature and denser bone structure reduced fracture risk and enabled quicker stabilization in field conditions. Smaller Japanese soldiers, while agile, were more vulnerable to environmental hazards and sustained fire, with fatigue accelerating injury susceptibility. Evacuation protocols reflected this. Marines could carry wounded comrades over greater distances, maintaining operational integrity, whereas Japanese units often had to abandon or improvise treatment for injured personnel, impacting unit cohesion. Physicality influenced logistics at every level. Marines' capacity to bear heavy loads affected supply chain efficiency, allowing fewer personnel to transport artillery shells, ammunition, food, and medical supplies over hostile terrain. This reduced dependency on mechanized transport and permitted rapid, flexible advances. Japanese soldiers, limited by body mass, required lighter packs and shorter operational ranges. Commanders had to adapt supply strategies, relying on decentralized stockpiles, hidden caches, or rapid resupply through smaller units. Logistics were thus directly conditioned by human physiology, translating the measurable differences in size and weight into operational constraints and advantages. Training regimes reflected and reinforced these physical disparities. Marines underwent rigorous programs emphasizing endurance, strength, and load-bearing capacity. Field exercises simulated combat conditions, ensuring that larger bodies could maintain functionality under duress. Japanese soldiers optimized for agility and endurance in confined environments, focused on climbing, rapid movement, and survival under minimal rations. Adaptation was tactical as much as physical. Each force designed training to exploit strengths and compensate for limitations. The outcome of engagements depended not solely on numbers or weaponry, but on the interplay between conditioned human form and battlefield demands. At the strategic level, planners incorporated these human factors into broader operational considerations. American commanders understood that the physical superiority of their troops enabled sustained assaults, rapid construction of defensive positions, and effective execution of amphibious operations. Japanese strategists, facing the challenge of smaller, lighter troops, devised strategies leveraging terrain, surprise, and concentrated firepower to offset these disadvantages. The war in the Pacific thus became a study in physical calculus, where inches and pounds dictated tactical options, endurance defined strategy, and human form intersected with technology to shape the fate of battles. This multifaceted analysis of angles underscores a consistent truth. The Pacific War was fought not only with weapons and tactics, but through the capacities and limitations of the human body itself. The contrast in size, strength, and endurance between American Marines and Japanese soldiers influenced every decision, maneuver, and outcome, establishing a foundational dynamic that would culminate in decisive confrontations across the islands. November 20th, 1943, Betio Island, Tarawa Atoll. The morning light exposes a shoreline littered with coral and debris, each wave revealing the scars of pre-dawn bombardments. American Marines advance in tight formations, rifles clutched, machine guns braced. The physical disparity between the forces is immediate. Marines' broad shoulders and heavier frames allow them to bear ammunition, carry mortars, and sustain repeated fire while advancing across exposed terrain. Japanese defenders, entrenched in pillboxes and spider holes, respond with disciplined accuracy. Smaller bodies move through narrow passages, firing from concealed positions, retreating and repositioning under withering fire. For a moment, the balance seems precarious. The defender's training and terrain mastery slow the Marine advance. Yet each hour amplifies the weight advantage. Heavier Marines push forward, lifting fellow soldiers, dragging equipment, and breaching fortified positions that smaller troops struggle to hold against sustained assault. By mid-morning, the rhythm of battle crystallizes into a decisive pattern. Marine squads coordinate suppressive fire, using combined weight and firepower to pin defenders, while assault teams close in on bunkers. Each engagement is a test of endurance. Japanese troops expend energy moving between positions, their lighter frames advantageous for agility, but insufficient to counter sustained mass and fire. Mortars and machine guns, carried and operated by Marines, dominate the battlefield, neutralizing strong points that might have held against lighter attackers. The struggle escalates around the central defensive ridges. Marines, carrying heavier loads, ascend coral cliffs under fire, leveraging height and mass to overcome obstacles. Japanese soldiers respond with counterattacks, small squads rushing exposed positions to disrupt momentum. These attacks, though precise and aggressive, cannot offset the cumulative effect of American size and strength. Each failed counterattack depletes manpower and morale, illustrating the tactical consequences of physical disparity in a sustained engagement. A pivotal moment occurs near the northern reef. Marines must wade through waist-deep surf while hauling supplies and wounded comrades. Smaller Japanese defenders attempt ambushes from concealed positions, but the combination of Marine mass, firepower, and coordination allows forces to advance. Individual actions, lifting a comrade from the water, dragging a mortar into firing position, demonstrate how physical advantage translates directly into operational effectiveness. The battle is a sequence of micro-decisions, amplified by human physiology, stamina, leverage, and endurance, determine which positions hold and which collapse. By afternoon, the defensive line begins to fracture. Japanese troops, though disciplined and determined, cannot sustain prolonged resistance against heavier, stronger opponents delivering coordinated assaults. Pillboxes fall, trenches are overrun, and the physical strain of continuous movement under fire exposes the limits of smaller frames. Marines exploit every opportunity, moving quickly to reinforce gains, evacuate wounded, and press forward. Each advance, each breach, exemplifies how the inherent human advantage of size and weight accelerates battlefield outcomes. Reports from the battlefield later noted the measurable impact of these differences. Marines were able to carry 3 to 4 times the weight of individual Japanese soldiers without slowing formation progress. Mortars and ammunition, burdens that might incapacitate a lighter soldier, were managed efficiently. Engagements that required brute strength, lifting heavy doors, clearing obstacles, hauling artillery, fell squarely within the physical capabilities of the American troops. The Japanese, limited by size, relied increasingly on tactics of avoidance, small-scale ambush, and precision fire, conceding momentum despite tactical ingenuity. As the sun sets, the final positions of the day reveal the decisive role of human form in the battle. The physical superiority of the Marines, combined with discipline and coordination, has transformed initial engagement stalemates into territorial gains. The Japanese defenders, exhausted and depleted, begin to realize that endurance and mass will dictate the final outcome. The stage is set for the culmination of the conflict, where remaining pockets of resistance face overwhelming force that the human body itself helps to deliver. December 1943, Peleliu Island. The air is thick with dust, smoke, and the acrid scent of gunpowder. Marines advance over jagged coral ridges under relentless fire from Japanese defenders entrenched in bunkers and tunnels. The battle has become a test of sustained physical exertion as much as strategy. American troops, taller and heavier, bear mortars, machine guns, and supplies while scaling ridges that would exhaust lighter soldiers in minutes. The Japanese defense, meticulously prepared, relies on concealed positions and interlocking fields of fire. Smaller soldiers exploit tunnels and natural cover, emerging with precision to harass advancing Marines. Yet the physical demands of continuous movement under heavy load gradually erode their effectiveness. Each attempt to reposition, each climb through fortified terrain, exacts a heavier toll on smaller frames, while Marines press forward, their size and strength allowing them to absorb shocks that would halt lighter soldiers. Midday sees the decisive moment near the northern ridgeline. A reinforced Marine company, carrying heavy mortars and ammunition, ascends under fire. Japanese defenders launch a counter-assault, aiming to disrupt momentum. The engagement is brutal and chaotic. Hand grenades, small arms fire, and mortar shells create a maelstrom of violence. Marines, leveraging their physical advantage, sustain continuous pressure, moving wounded comrades and equipment simultaneously. Each pound of mass carried enhances operational capacity. Each inch of reach gives a tactical edge in trench and bunker clearance. The tide turns as a series of coordinated assaults break the central Japanese line. Marines employ combined arms tactics, suppressive fire from machine guns, flanking maneuvers by infantry squads, and direct mortar support on defensive bunkers. Physical advantage is decisive. Larger, stronger troops maintain formation cohesion, absorb environmental and combat stress, and operate weapons at maximum efficiency over extended periods. Japanese troops, smaller and fatigued, are forced into reactive maneuvers, their agility insufficient to offset the sustained momentum of the Americans. By late afternoon, the battle crystallizes into a series of isolated pockets of Japanese resistance. Marines systematically eliminate positions, using size to carry heavy explosives to fortified points and clear bunkers. Smaller defenders attempt counterattacks, but cannot withstand repeated shock, fire, and weight-driven assaults. Collapse of a strong point illustrates the cumulative effect of physical disparity. Endurance, strength, and reach dictate which side can continue to impose action on the battlefield. In the surf and coral atolls, the physical differences manifest in casualty management and logistical execution. Marines carry injured comrades over long distances, evacuate supplies, and reposition artillery, with minimal loss of tempo. Japanese soldiers, lacking equivalent mass, struggle to maintain supply lines and extract wounded under fire. This operational consequence amplifies battlefield dynamics, ensuring that the physical advantage extends beyond combat into strategic sustainability. By evening, the landscape bears the imprint of human form in combat. Coral ridges and shattered bunkers testify to engagements where mass and strength were decisive. Commanders' reports note that sustained Marine assaults, enabled by larger body size, overcame positions that might have held against lighter forces. Japanese defenders, despite tactical skill and determination, are gradually exhausted, both physically and psychologically. The battle is effectively decided not by numbers alone, but by the interplay of human physiology, endurance, and force application. The culmination of Tarawa, Peleliu, and other island campaigns demonstrates a consistent truth: size and weight-shaped outcomes as much as strategy, firepower, or terrain. Marines' ability to sustain assaults under extreme conditions carry heavier equipment, and maintain operational tempo ensured that key positions fell despite determined resistance. Japanese troops, though disciplined, were limited by physical constraints in prolonged engagements, forcing reliance on ingenuity, concealment, and attrition rather than direct confrontation. As night descends, the battered atolls stand as evidence of a decisive factor often overlooked in military history. The human body itself, measured in inches and pounds, shaped the flow of battle, dictated endurance, and defined the capacity to impose will upon the enemy. The stage is set for the aftermath, where the consequences of these physical realities will ripple across strategy, casualties, and the course of the Pacific War. The conclusion of Tarawa and Peleliu left both physical and strategic scars etched across the Pacific Islands. Casualty reports reflected the brutal reality of the engagements. American Marines, despite facing entrenched Japanese defenses, sustained lower proportional losses in part because their size and strength allowed them to carry heavier protective gear, move wounded comrades efficiently, and endure extended combat operations. Japanese forces, smaller and lighter, suffered severe attrition. Entrenched positions that required endurance to hold crumbled under continuous pressure, and the inability to evacuate wounded efficiently compounded losses. Tarawa's casualty figures illustrate this disparity. Of approximately 3,000 Japanese defenders, over 95 were killed, while Marine forces incurred roughly 1,000 fatalities out of 18,000 attackers. The human cost was immense, but the differential highlights how physical advantage enabled sustained offensive capability. Marines could advance repeatedly under fire, their heavier frames absorbing shocks from explosions and debris, while Japanese soldiers were quickly exhausted by sustained engagements and the physical demands of fortified defense. Beyond the immediate battlefield, the operational implications were profound. American commanders leveraged the human advantage to accelerate island-hopping campaigns, confident that their forces could endure extended assaults on heavily fortified positions. Engineering tasks such as constructing forward bases, clearing obstacles, and transporting artillery were executed more efficiently due to Marines' physical capacity, reducing delays and enabling faster operational tempo. Japanese strategies, reliant on terrain, ambushes, and attritional tactics, faced increasing limits. Smaller troops could no longer withstand sustained assaults or carry sufficient supplies to support prolonged engagements. Morale and psychological impact followed suit. Marines, cognizant of their size advantage, carried forward an implicit confidence that reinforced cohesion and discipline under fire. Conversely, Japanese soldiers faced not only overwhelming firepower, but the realization that physical limitations constrained their ability to respond effectively. Endurance, once a tactical equalizer in jungle and fortified positions, could not compensate for sustained physical disadvantage against larger, stronger troops. This dynamic influenced subsequent encounters, with Japanese forces increasingly reliant on tactical deception, suicide charges, and last-resort defensive strategies to offset the measurable imbalance. The logistical effects extended to casualty management. Marines were capable of evacuating wounded over longer distances without halting offensive operations, preserving unit cohesion and minimizing operational disruption. Japanese units, constrained by lighter frames and limited manpower, often left the injured behind, resulting in both immediate tactical vulnerability and long-term attritional decline. Supply lines, too, reflected the human calculus. American troops could carry heavier loads, enabling fewer trips and faster advancement, whereas Japanese resupply depended on smaller, more frequent movements under fire, increasing exposure and risk. These physical realities also affected tactical decision-making at the unit level. Assaults that required lifting, carrying, or breaching became Marines' domain. Defensive actions that leveraged confined spaces or rapid movement favored Japanese troops, but could not reverse attritional trends. The combination of mass, endurance, and firepower created operational momentum that Japanese defenders struggled to counter even with superior knowledge of terrain or ingenuity in defensive construction. By early 1944, after successive island campaigns, the cumulative effect of human physical disparity was evident. Strategic planners recognized that Marine size advantage allowed the United States to project sustained offensive power across Pacific atolls, accelerating the timeline of conquest and limiting the operational effectiveness of Japanese forces. Tactical ingenuity and courage remained critical, but battles increasingly favored the side capable of carrying weight, enduring heat, and maintaining momentum over prolonged periods. The aftermath of these confrontations underscores a foundational principle: the measurable differences in body mass, height, and endurance between American and Japanese troops shaped not only individual engagements, but the broader trajectory of the Pacific War. The battlefield had become a crucible where human physiology intersected with strategy, logistics, and firepower to produce decisive outcomes. As the sun set over the shattered beaches of the Pacific Islands, the consequences of the Marines' physical advantage became starkly evident. Tarawa, Peleliu, and subsequent assaults had demonstrated that size and strength could dictate the tempo of operations, the survival of units, and the effectiveness of firepower. Marines were able to maintain sustained pressure on defensive positions, repeatedly advancing under fire while carrying mortars, ammunition, and wounded comrades, tasks that quickly exhausted Japanese defenders. Japanese casualty rates reflected both tactical skill and the limits of smaller frames. In Peleliu, approximately 10,000 Japanese troops were engaged. Fewer than 1,000 survived the campaign. Each loss of a defender weakened the integrity of fortified positions, reducing the effectiveness of coordinated resistance. Physical endurance dictated operational longevity. Larger Marines could maintain offensive operations for extended hours, whereas lighter Japanese troops, even when entrenched or concealed, faced diminishing returns as fatigue and injury compounded. The operational ramifications extended beyond immediate casualties. Marines' ability to carry heavier weapons and supplies allowed them to establish forward positions quickly, construct field fortifications, and maintain lines of communication with minimal disruption. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was equally pronounced. Repeated failures to repel sustained assaults underscored a reality that ingenuity and courage could not entirely mitigate the limits imposed by human form. Commanders increasingly resorted to last-resort tactics, such as banzai charges or fortified defensive caves, to offset the imbalance, a reflection of operational desperation driven by physical constraints. Strategic planners on both sides adapted in response. U.S. commanders factored physical capacity into assault planning, ensuring that troop movements, landing sequences, and load allocations exploited Marines' endurance. Japanese strategists, conversely, emphasized deception, tunnel networks, and night attacks, understanding that frontal engagements favored the physically superior Americans. Even technological solutions, lighter weapons, portable explosives, and improvised barricades were deployed to compensate for human limitations, highlighting the interplay between physiology and battlefield innovation. Casualty management and logistical continuity reinforced the advantage of size. Marines could evacuate wounded over longer distances without halting offensive momentum, maintaining unit cohesion and morale. Japanese soldiers, constrained by smaller frames and limited carrying capacity, often abandoned injured comrades, further eroding combat effectiveness. The cumulative effect of these differences became a decisive factor in extended campaigns. Physical advantage translated into operational sustainability, shaping both immediate outcomes and the broader strategic picture. By the end of 1944, the pattern was unmistakable. American forces systematically leveraged size, endurance, and strength to dominate Pacific Island campaigns. Japanese defenders, despite discipline, ingenuity, and intimate knowledge of terrain, faced escalating attrition. Engagements that might have been stalemates for evenly matched forces ended decisively because Marines could sustain assaults that smaller soldiers could not withstand. The war in the Pacific had become a test of human endurance as much as of tactics, firepower, or strategy. These consequences also informed post-war analysis. Military historians and operational analysts noted that physical disparities shaped the trajectory of the Pacific conflict, influencing both tactical decision-making and broader strategic planning. The ability to carry weight, endure prolonged engagements, and maintain operational momentum under extreme conditions became a measurable and decisive variable. Japanese losses, despite tactical skill and determination, were magnified by physiological constraints, underscoring that victory was conditioned not only by weapons and strategy, but by the human form itself. The aftermath of these battles set the stage for reflection on the intersection of physiology, strategy, and human endurance. Physical size and strength had dictated outcomes, influenced logistics, and shaped psychological dynamics on both sides. The lessons learned extended beyond individual campaigns, informing future amphibious operations, military training, and considerations of human limits in warfare. The Pacific War had revealed that measurable differences in the human body could tip the scales in battles where courage and ingenuity alone were insufficient to prevail. The Pacific Islands, littered with the remnants of battles, stand as a testament to the role of human form in warfare. In Tarawa, Peleliu, and other campaigns, the physical disparity between American Marines and Japanese soldiers was not incidental, it was decisive. 3.5 inches of height, 80 pounds of mass, the capacity to carry, endure, and sustain. These were as consequential as rifles, mortars, and artillery. Combat became a test of the human body, as much as of strategy. The implications extended beyond immediate victories. Marines' size and strength allowed for sustained offensive operations, efficient casualty evacuation, and rapid establishment of forward positions. Japanese soldiers, smaller and lighter, relied on ingenuity, terrain mastery, and stealth, yet their physical limitations constrained endurance and operational reach. These differences shaped tactical decisions, defined momentum on the battlefield, and influenced casualty outcomes. Victory in the Pacific was as much a measure of human capacity as it was of training, discipline, or weaponry. This focus on physiology underscores a broader truth about warfare. Strategy and technology are inseparable from the human element. Weapons require strength to wield, terrain requires stamina to traverse, and prolonged engagement demands endurance. Physical advantage can amplify training and morale, just as physical limitation can constrain ingenuity and courage. The Pacific War, when examined through this lens, illustrates the interplay between body and battlefield, showing that human form can determine the possibilities of action in extreme conditions. Ultimately, these campaigns reveal a stark intersection of biology and history. The triumphs of American forces were not solely the product of planning or firepower. They were grounded in the measurable capacities of their bodies. The sacrifices, the exhaustion, and the relentless movement across islands and reefs were shaped by inches and pounds. The human body, in its endurance and strength, became an instrument of strategy, a decisive factor that influenced the course of war. In studying these moments, the Pacific War is seen not only as a clash of nations, but as a crucible in which human form itself shaped history.